Are you just beginning to draw? Are you a new person at this? It's a great world and many great adventures are ahead of you. However, I want to share 5 things I wish I had known when I started to draw. These are 5 things that, looking back, I can see are very important in drawing. And they're not technique tips, they're not things actually to do with drawing, they're more bigger picture things to do with how we think and organize and progress our drawing. But I think if you take these 5 things on board, I think you will fast track your development. I think you will fast track your skills improving. I think you will fast track looking at things you've drawn today and comparing them with things you drew a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, and think, wow, I can see I've improved. And can I say, as someone who's been on this drawing journey fairly recently, it's a great feeling to feel that you've improved. So, yeah, so let's look into it. And if you're watching, I've got one person, you're my first. Oh, no, they've gone. Anyway, let's start. What are these 5 things I wish I'd known when I first started to draw? The first thing that I didn't appreciate is that observation is way more important than I thought. I would say now, having drawn hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of detailed drawings in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say now that careful observation is probably 90% of the most important thing we have to learn to do. And the actual drawing skills is maybe 10%. The problem most of our drawings have, when they don't look like what we've copied from, whether it's a drawing or whether we're looking at something in front of us, if our drawing doesn't look the way our reference is, it's really only one of 2 reasons. One is we've failed to actually put on the paper what our reference says. But the other is that we haven't seen our reference carefully enough, clearly enough to know what to draw. We've failed to see the points that we need to see and how we need to see them to put them on paper accurately. And so what that means is I look at something, I don't see it clearly enough, accurately enough, but I start to draw anyway. And that means I'm drawing what I think I've seen, not what I've actually seen. Does that make point? It's a really important point. I'm drawing what I think I've seen, not what I've really seen. And I think we see this in lots of subjects, and particularly a good example is with trees, because I look at a photo of a tree, or I look at a tree in front of me and I start to draw it. And I think, I know what a tree looks like. A tree has leaves. And so I'm looking down at my paper and I'm starting to draw leaves. But the problem is, I'm not drawing what I see in front of me. I'm drawing this memory of leaves, of what leaves are and how they are and how many there are. And usually, in this example with leaves and trees, I get overwhelmed because I know there are so many leaves on a tree. And what I'm doing in the end is I'm starting to draw what I know is on the tree, not what I can actually see in front of me. It's why if you look at a lot of portraiture drawings of people who are just starting out in their portraiture, usually the features end up being way too large for the proportions of the head overall. And that's because we look at the reference and we think, oh, yeah, the eyes, the nose, and we draw those things because they're very important to us and we look at them or we draw them large. But then when we draw the outside shape, it's not so important to us. We haven't looked at it as carefully in life, and we look at our reference quickly and go, oh, yeah, I know, that's a line around the edges. And so we fail to leave enough space. It's like when we put the eyes in. I mean, I'm not a portraiture drawer, but I've seen enough beginner portrait drawings. We don't usually have enough forehead because we don't observe it carefully enough. And we think, oh, yeah, I know, a forehead, that's just that blank bit above the eyes. And we really fail to appreciate that the eyes truly are, in most people's faces, in the center. And so the top of the head's too short. We don't leave enough room for the brain. And so observation is the key. And in fact, we need to learn to observe just as much as we need to learn to have drawing skills. I have, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 videos on observing, learning to observe, learning the things that we need to look for when we look at our reference, so that when we start to draw, we actually have the data we need. We have the information we need. And so we're not just drawing from a vague memory of something we think we've seen in our reference. So yeah, careful observation is the first point. Yeah, but the good news with that is we're actually better at drawing than we think. And when we look at a drawing that doesn't look right, it's so easy to think, oh, I can't draw. But the problem isn't that I lack the skills to draw it. The problem is more that I haven't actually observed what I need to see to draw it. And so I've tied, one hand behind my back and I've shut both eyes before I start to draw. So that's the good news. Drawing isn't as hard as we think. The bad news is observing is probably harder than we think, but it's a skill that can be learned. So let's learn it. And as I said, I've got those video resources that I hope can help you with that. And look, if hey, the 2 people who are listening, if you have any questions you want to ask me about drawing, please chat. Please type them into the box. Okay, the second point. So the first point, if you're a beginner drawer, is to understand that observing is more important than you think. In my thinking, it's like 90% versus 10% drawing skills. And most drawings fail because we haven't seen what we need to see when we start to draw. But my second advice, if you're beginning to draw, is to niche down. Now, this is a phrase you'll have heard if you watch How to Grow Your Instagram accounts. Niche down with what you try and draw. See, what can you draw? Well, anything at all. And that can be a problem. What do I draw? Whatever you draw, limit the subject that you draw and limit the medium that you use to draw it in. So, for instance, I draw architecture. I draw what I call architectural landscapes. And that's what I started doing. And in fact, when I started drawing the architecture, I didn't draw people because I couldn't draw people, and I left out cars because I don't like drawing cars. And I just concentrated on the architecture. And there's a lot of advantages in that because it lets us get good at a small area, at a small subject. I mean, there's lots of architecture, but it's the same sort of principles, the same sort of things I need to keep developing, understanding perspective, understanding how to draw the effect of decorative carvings, drawing things such as columns and domes and whatnot. Now, if I was doing portraiture all the time, then I'd be learning different things. I'd be learning how to draw the eyes properly and how to make sure that the pupils line up and how to draw facial hair, how to draw glasses. I'd be learning all the things that you need to learn for that. And by staying in that subject area, it does let me develop those skills a lot more quickly. However, if we're going to do that, draw things you like. What should you draw? Choose the subject. It doesn't matter what you draw. No subject is really more important than any other. Is really more difficult than any other subject. But whatever you draw, you're going to be looking at a lot. So make it something you like. I love buildings. I love grand architecture. I'm not an architect. I never have been one. And people often think I am. But I did almost study architecture when I left school. And so clearly I enjoyed that. And so I like looking at buildings. I like looking at old buildings. And I like drawing them, therefore. Any tips for using Pro Marker? Okay, well, I'll do my 5 points and then I'll address that. So draw things that we want to look at because we'll be spending a lot of time with that, and focus also not just on the subject, but focus also on the medium that you use, whether it's pencil, whether it's pen, whether it's watercolor, whether it's a multimedia thing, use the same medium because it will let you improve and get better at that. Before I did any drawing, I didn't start drawing till I was 60, but before I did any drawing, I actually painted in oil paints, large paintings of Australian trees and flowers. And I live in Australia, so it's our native bush and flora. And I did that, and I worked hard at that, and I was really surprised when I started drawing, having really concentrated on one subject and one medium, oil paint. I was surprised how much that improved my drawing. And often when I was drawing, I'd be thinking, yes, when I was painting, it was like this. That would mean, and it was so many things were applicable that you wouldn't have thought. So if you become really good in one medium with one subject, it will help you to improve with anything you do. The way musicians who've learned to play one instrument really well can almost always pick up another instrument very quickly because the skills they've developed are applicable in another context. But they've only developed those skills because they worked in the one instrument, the one area so much. And so that brings me to my third point. Okay, so the first point, drawing is more observation than drawing skills. So we need to learn to observe more carefully than we think we do. The second point is niche down, concentrate on just a smaller subject and one medium or whatever medium you use or media, stay in that sphere and get good in that materials. But thirdly, think musical instruments. Think about learning an instrument. I don't know why, but people seem to think that learning to draw should be quite an easy thing. And if I don't have a really successful drawing, almost straight away, I'm hopeless and I don't know what I was thinking. Learning to draw is the same as learning anything else. And think of learning the piano, say. I mean, I don't have musical instrument skills, but my children have all had piano lessons when they were little. And no one expected them to be able to play a nice piece first off. We all knew it would take practice. And we started them on simple pieces because we wanted them to do well and to succeed. And because you learn better by learning to play simple pieces well than by playing complicated pieces badly. And when I see a lot of drawings, especially drawings from beginners, unfortunately, what I see is a lot of people playing complicated pieces badly. I see really ambitious subjects, and I can appreciate that. I mean, if you love architecture, then you're going to want to draw grand architecture. But if we run before we can walk, then we set ourselves up to fail. And if I keep drawing bad drawings, then I'll get good at doing bad drawings. My son used to practice the piano very quickly, and I said, to him, look, if you keep doing that, you'll become very good at playing the piano badly, too quickly, because we get better at what we practice. So it is important at the start that we develop good habits and that we at least some areas learn to develop our skills before we move on to harder things. So, I mean, it's always good to push ourselves, don't get me wrong. It's always good to tackle things that we think might be too hard. But it's not helpful to be drawing things that we will consistently do bad drawings of, because then we don't learn any of the things that we need to learn to develop our skill. In fact, we can just get used to seeing bad drawings and end up thinking they're okay. And that's not helpful. So think musical instrument learning. I need to practice. It's better to have a simple piece that I learn well. It's better to do a simple drawing that I draw really well. I will learn more from that. And I learned that principle with, they're called Eisteddfods, these music competitions that my kids used to go in, that they could play any piece they wanted to, but the winner was the person who played the piece the best. And a simple piece played well, played perfectly, would beat an extraordinarily complicated piece that wasn't played as well. So whatever piece you played, the important thing was that you do it well. And it is the same in drawing. So, so yeah, yeah. Be aware that we will need to practice. We won't start where we finish. But don't start with things that is going to be really hard to draw well, where there are too many things that we have to think about. The thing with playing simple pieces is usually that there just aren't that many things that you need to know to get it right. And then the pieces get more difficult with a new thing introduced that is a bit more of a challenge. And so in degrees, the skill development happens. I think drawing can be really helpfully done like that. So, yeah, think musical instruments. That's the third point. So the first point, what beginners need to know is careful observation is so much more important than you think. Our drawings don't look the way we want them to, more often because we haven't seen what we need to see to draw them accurately. Secondly, niche down. If we limit our subject area and our materials, it's easier to get good at using them and to get good at drawing those things. So niche down in what we draw and what we draw it with. The third point, think musical instruments. We don't expect to learn to play the piano without some work and effort, and we don't expect to play it well straight off. Drawing's the same. Don't get discouraged if your initial drawing doesn't look everything you wanted it to be. Your next one will be better. The fourth point is critique your work when you have finished it. Critique your work when you have finished it. What do I mean? I mean, have a look at your drawing and don't just say, oh, this is hopeless or this is great, but look at it carefully and look at the reference photo as well and say, okay, what have I done well in? What haven't I done well in? Am I happy with it is one thing, but is it an accurate drawing is another thing. You see, if I do that, it lets me focus on where my next drawing will need to go. So if I look at a drawing that I've done and I think, yeah, the drawing's all okay, but gosh, the tones are a bit boring. There's a lot of kind of middle tones. There's not much drama or contrast. So in my next drawing, I want to make the darks darker and maybe keep more of the lights lighter and maybe not put so much mid-grey all in the same place. And so that's my self-critiquing. And when I start my next drawing or when I start doing adding the tone, I've got that in my head to give me direction to help take my overall skill development and how my drawings look in a certain direction where I want them to go. And so, sometimes when we finish a drawing, we just, want to move on to the next one. But we need to look at it. If we're drawing architecture, did I get the perspective correct? Are the angles correct? Measure them really carefully and see. If I know, for instance, that I tend to underestimate the more extreme perspective lines all the time, and if in my critiquing I see that, then what that can help me do is when I draw, I say to myself, well, I want to put the line here, but I know I always underestimate it, so I need to push it up a bit higher to get it right. I need to compensate for what I know my kind of natural underestimating is. And so there are all these things that if we critique afterwards, we can learn to help give us direction. And the other point to remember is that if we don't look at our work and ask, how can I do it better? How can I get a result that's more what I want? If we accept it as it is, we're never going to move past those mistakes. We're never going to move past the weaknesses if we don't seek to identify them and say, how can I do this better? How can I go past how my drawings always look? And I sometimes look at drawings on Instagram and I see the same mistakes in drawing after drawing, or the same weaknesses in drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing. And it's such a shame. It's such a shame because the person's putting a lot of time into their drawing, but I'm sure that they're wanting their drawing to have a more realistic look than what they're achieving. But doing the same thing over and over and over again doesn't necessarily lead to improving. So that's my fourth point: critique your work. So the first point is careful observation is much more important than you think. And most drawings that don't look like what we're copying them from, it's not because we lack drawing skills, it's because we lack the ability to see in our reference what we need to see to then put it onto the paper. Second point is to niche down, have a limited subject matter and a limited materials that we use so that we can get really good at those. And then it will be easier to do good work in new areas and with new materials. If we scatter ourselves widely all the time, we won't become adept, we won't become skillful in any one. And the third point, think musical instruments. We need to practice. We don't expect to learn the piano brilliantly first lesson. Drawings like that as well. Fourth point, critique our work. The fifth point, this is, probably the closest point that comes to being controversial, but I truly believe this is so important, is avoid copying other artists' work. Avoid copying, if you're drawing, other artists' drawings. And I know that this is a really popular practice. The problem is with drawing other artists' drawings is it won't give me the skill I need to develop if I want to do my own drawings. If what I want to learn to do is to do copies of other people's work, then great, do it, because that will develop the skills of copying to be able to reproduce someone else's drawing. But it won't help me learn to do my own drawings because it won't teach me the skills I need. And that's really, really important. I've had a lot of people make the comment to me over the years, oh, look, I don't know what's wrong. I draw other people's drawings, I copy other people's work, and the drawings look amazing. But then when I go to do my own drawing, I still don't even know where to start. I don't understand it. The problem is when they draw someone else's drawing, they haven't had to learn where to start because they've been able to just copy the other drawing. They haven't had to look at a subject and say, how do I translate this image into line? How do I, if it's in person, or in life, this three-dimensional shape into two-dimension? If it's a photo, how do I start to translate this photo of a tree with all its complexity onto paper in a drawing using a pen? How do I do that? Because in copying other artists' drawings of trees, you haven't had to learn how to do that. So, and yet it's a tempting thing to do, because when we do it, we can usually do a much better drawing than we could do ourselves. And the problem is it gives us a misleading impression as to how good I really am at creating things myself. And that can just lead to confusion and discouragement and make us give up, when in fact we just haven't understood that that's not a helpful thing to do. It's not that I have a problem with people copying my work. I mean, I don't. If you want to draw one of my drawings, then do it. If you post it on social media, then please be honourable and say it's copied from a drawing by @Travers Art. But I want you to know that you won't learn to draw your own similar drawings to mine by copying mine, because you won't develop the creative thinking that you need to have to look at the drawing, the photo, and then work out, how do I show that on this paper? So avoid copying. Be inspired by other artists. I certainly am inspired by other artists, and I've got drawers who I follow and I really like their work. But I don't try and draw their drawings because I know that's not going to help me develop my skills. I can look at their drawings and I can then go away and remember that and try and incorporate that into my creative technique. So that's my fifth point. Try and avoid copying. So I have a question from Tanner Watt, and it's, any tips for using Pro Marker on details buildings? Look, I don't use Pro Markers, if that's a brand. I use Copic sketch markers. I have my supplies just here, and I use the brush end of the Copic sketch markers to get my tone. And there's a different um, pen for different shades of the grey that I use. But it doesn't matter what brand you use, but I would recommend you use the same brand over again because they handle differently. So you want to develop skills with that brand rather than keep changing the way it works. But tips for using program. I think what I find personally when I'm doing architectural details and I'm using tone to help show those details rather than line, so I use line and tone, I often use with the tone negative spacing. So I draw the shadows in and I let the space around the object show the object. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say with that, but that's what the tone's great for. It's obviously great for shadows. The other thing is not to be afraid to go dark with the tone. If we're going to use tone, let's create a bit of visual drama and get some really great contrast going. So that's it. They're my 5 points if you're beginning to draw. Point 1, realize that observation is a much more important factor than you think. I think a good drawing is 90% good observation, 10% drawing skills. We can't draw what we haven't seen, and the problem is we think we've seen enough to draw it accurately, and we haven't. And usually the difference between what my drawing looks like and the reference is that I haven't observed it enough to know what I need to draw. And so I've drawn what I think I've seen, what I remember I've seen, or just I see that and go with memories of having seen that thing in other places. Second point, niche down. Don't try and draw every subject. Don't try and use every art supply. Use the same art supplies, preferably the same brands, and stick with a small range and become skilled in them. And those skills then you can take into other brands, but you'll learn them more quickly by limiting what you do. And draw things you like, because it will be easier to observe them carefully because you'll enjoy looking at them. And you will be looking at things a lot in great detail if you're going to draw them. So niche down in what we draw and what we draw it with. Third point, think musical instruments. We don't learn the piano overnight. We don't learn to draw overnight. We start with the piano with simple pieces that focus on a few skills, and then we go to more complicated pieces that add more complicated elements. And that's a better model for drawing. Don't start with the grandest architectural building in the world just because you love it. Start with smaller things, and when they look right, move on to more complicated things. And when they look right, you can move on to more complicated things. But if you're drawing simpler things that don't still look quite right, then drawing the Taj Mahal isn't going to help you develop the skills that you want to learn. The fourth one, critique your work. After you've finished, look at what you've done and get a focus for where you want to go. And because you can't go past what you accept. Once you think, oh, that'll do, you're never going to develop the skills to do better than that. And the last one, avoid copying, because copying other artists' work doesn't teach me the skills I need to develop my own technique. So there we have it. So yeah, drawing's a fantastic thing to do. So it's so accessible. We just need a pen, a bit of paper. We can draw anywhere in almost any time available. So enjoy it, have fun, and yeah, I have maybe 100 videos on how to draw now. So have a look at them. They're focused around architectural drawing, but a lot of the principles are the same. So I'll see you next time. Bye.